37% of all new cars sold in India last month were SUVs. For reference, 35% were hatchbacks, 16% were MUVs, and only 12% were sedans. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you're looking to buy a new vehicle today, chances are that you are looking at an SUV. And the most popular kind of these SUVs are the sub 4 meter SUVs. And today we have three of the highest selling ones. This is the Tata Nexon. We also have the brand new Maruti Suzuki Brezza with us, and we also have the facelifted Hyundai Venue. Today, we're going to be talking about what they like to drive, their features, the space, the comfort, and a lot more. So let's get started. Actually, before we get started, do let us know in the comments below which one you like the best, and subscribe to the autoX YouTube channel for more such content. But without further ado, let's go. Actually, before we get to the driving bit, let's talk a little bit about styling, and we'll talk about the brand new Maruti Suzuki Brezza first. Now, when Maruti was updating the Brezza, they've given it a lot of fresh elements. So there's a lot more plastic cladding here. It's also a lot more squared off. It has a really more imposing stance than the previous Brezza. In fact, it actually also looks wider in person compared to the outgoing Brezza. So I think the changes that Maruti has brought onto this really make it a much more imposing SUV in that regard. Maruti is also offering some really interesting color options. There's also that Terrascape and Cityscape color themes that you can choose from. So you can really spec up the Brezza quite nicely. It also gets really nice diamond cut alloy wheels, which look really nice even when the car is moving. Let's talk next about the Tata Nexon. Now, the Nexon hasn't been updated for a while now, but it does look good. So there are those flared arches. It really does look muscular. I also like the front end. It's very nice and imposing. The Nexon does look good. I like that there's also interesting color options on the Nexon. What we have with us is not the top spec variant. This is a friend of ours lent us their Nexon, so thank you to them for that. But this is not a top spec variant. Of course, that gets alloy wheels and all that stuff. So it does look better in the top spec. But even here, the Nexon does look good. Of course, there's a lot of Nexons on the road, so you won't really be standing out. And that's the same case for the Hyundai Venue. So when Hyundai was facelifting the Venue, they have not made too many changes to the face as such, so it gets a little bit different treatment for the LED DRL, slightly different headlights, a slightly different grille, but the front is largely the same to what we first saw with the Venue. The rear gets that new LED full width light bar, and I think that looks really special at night. Makes the Venue really stand out, especially this facelift version, but you won't really be doing too much standing out if you are in actually any three of these cars. But that's enough about styling. Let's get to driving now. So we're starting out with the Nexon because of course this is relatively the oldest car of the bunch here, and the Nexon is actually a fairly nice car to drive. What we're driving today is not the Nexon media car, so it's not really a top end model. This is a Nexon that we've borrowed from one of our friends. So you know, it's got a bit of accessories on the outside as well as the inside. Now that said, let's talk a little bit about the Nexon's cabin. So again, you do have a digital instrument cluster, but this isn't really that advanced. So of course you have your fuel readout on the right side and the RPM readout on the left side, and then you have a sort of semi-digital cluster in the middle. But I feel the thing is, the screen is too small and there's like a lot of information in that really small tight space, so it's not really very legible. The good thing is that the speed is like a big readout, so you won't really be confused and be looking for that too much. But aside from that, this instrument cluster is not the best in the business. Definitely not on par with the other two cars that we have with us today. Now actually the rest of the Nexon's cabin is also in need of a dire update. Now I know this is not the top spec variant, so this has a different screen and all that, but we have of course driven the most updated Nexon, and even in that the infotainment screen is just not up to the mark. I know it does get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but the software is just not up to the mark. The screen size is not great. So I feel Tata really needs to step up that infotainment game. A great example is the Venue. When we hop into the Venue, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Hyundai has already updated that. So I feel Tata really needs to sort of update their infotainment systems. But aside from that, the Nexon does have all the features that you really need. So you do get So you do get climate control on the top spec variants. You also get ventilated seats on the top spec variants, which is really nice to see. Ventilated seats, of course, in the summer of our country are probably the best feature you can have on any car. So that is a big plus point for the Nexon. You of course do also get a sunroof. You also get a lot of options in terms of the powertrain. We're driving the petrol manual. Now this is actually good because the petrol automatic isn't really that great. The diesel automatic is also not that great. I would suggest that if you're looking to buy the Nexon, stick to the manual variants. There, Tata makes really good, nice manual gearboxes. The AMTs are really not so great. They're a little bit lackluster. So as far as the manual gearbox goes, this is actually really nice. The clutch is nice and light. Of course, this is someone else's car, so their driving habits have sort of influenced the clutch pedal feel a little bit. But we have driven the Nexon earlier, and the clutch feels fine. The gearbox is nice and slick. It's actually one of the nicer units around. It has a nice positive throws, so really nice to play with. And that's what you want from a manual gearbox. One thing I want to point out is that the armrest here on the Nexon is really well placed. You can really rest your hand here. If you're on the highway or you really need to sort of take a bit of a time off from holding two hands on the steering wheel, this armrest is really well positioned for that, and it's a nice big armrest. Aside from that, the cabin is really nice. The build quality is really good. When you shut the doors on the Nexon, it feels solid, and that's one thing that really filters through on the Nexon. It really does feel robust. Even the ride quality is fantastic. The Nexon, it handles bumps and potholes really well. Almost never, even when you go through deep potholes and really bad rough patches, you don't really need to slow down on the Nexon. This handles it as if it were a true proper SUV, and that's one thing that the Nexon really has going for it. When compared to the competition, almost all of them feel a little bit like hatchbacks on stilts. The Nexon really does not give you that feeling. It really feels like a big solid car. It feels really muscular. And I also want to point out that the 5-star safety of the Nexon has to be highlighted. That is a big plus point for the Nexon. So we're driving the turbo petrol Nexon. So let's talk a little bit about this engine. Now this engine is not something that really likes to be revved out really hard, but that's not too bad. So right now I'm in third gear. If I push it foot flat to the floor, it does take its own sweet time to sort of build up those revs, but it does pick up pace really well. Now that being said, the Nexon's engine is actually really happy being in the low end of the RPM range. So if you keep it around 2,500 RPM, the engine also is not very noisy, and there's enough low end torque that you can actually get a move on without having to downshift a gear. So I'm in 2000 RPM right now. I put my foot down, and it really does pick up pace really well. So you don't really need to rev out the Nexon's engine, and it's nice that the engine doesn't promote you to do that as well. Now in terms of refinement, this is not the most refined engine out there. It has a really gruff noise above 3,500–4,000 RPM, and it really makes itself audible in the cabin, and the noise is not a very enthusiastic noise. But aside from that, when it's in the low RPM range, it's fairly refined. It doesn't really creep into the cabin too much, and what does creep in is a fairly mechanical noise, so it's not too bad. Road noise is also fairly well contained, and the Nexon overall feels really nice to drive. Now, even the high-speed stability of the Nexon is fantastic, and yes, this engine can hold a high-speed cruise really easily. So you can be in at 100, 120, and on the highway, the engine feels not stressed at all. So that's again a plus point for the Nexon. So we're now driving the Hyundai Venue. Now, when Hyundai updated the Venue, it's basically stuck to stuff that was sort of really needed on the Venue when they were deciding on what to add here on the facelift. So the big changes are the digital instrument cluster that it gets. It also gets paddle shifters here for the automatic gearbox. So we're driving the 1-liter turbo petrol engine with the DCT. So yes, this does get paddle shifters. You also get a new steering wheel. This is sort of the same steering wheel as we've seen on the Creta. It's like a sort of a 2-spoke steering wheel. And you also get an updated infotainment system as well as drive modes. So let's talk about all of those features one by one. So let's first talk about this digital instrument cluster. Now, I sort of like how Hyundai's executed this. Now, there's not too much functionality, so you can't really have a map or stuff like that here on the instrument cluster. Basically, what it is the speedo and the RPM readout is now digital. The central bit is still like a regular MID like you would get on even the last gen, on the pre-facelift Venue, but it is now color, so the fuel efficiency readout and all is showing in blue and it's colored. So that's pretty cool. There's also a blue ring going around it, and that sort of flashes red to show different warnings. So if your door is open or something like that, it flashes red and shows you that. So that is a little bit of added functionality, but that's not too much. I wouldn't have really minded analog dials either. Then there's the infotainment system. Now, at first glance, this actually doesn't really seem new, but the big change here is that it is very responsive to your touch. The infotainment system in the outgoing Venue didn't really need an update. It wasn't really crying for an update, but the updates here are really good. It makes the infotainment system feel that much newer, that much crisper, and that much more modern. It really responds to your touch as fast as your smartphone would. Now, while that is good, the Venue, even though it does get an update, it does not get wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. So that I think is a bit of a miss. You do obviously get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto when you plug in the wire. That's through a USB-A cable. You also have a USB-C port here, but that's only to charge your phone. But still, it's nice to see a USB-C port. Maybe in the next update, we'll also see Apple CarPlay and Android Auto being allowed through the Type-C port. There's also two Type-C ports at the back. There's also a rear AC vent. So the Venue is pretty well kitted out when you talk about features, which is why Hyundai didn't really need to update it too much. So it already has a sunroof. It already has automatic climate control. There is cruise control. So the Venue is actually really well kitted out. One place I think it really does miss out are the speakers. On this model, they really don't sound that good. I know the i20 and the Creta have the Bose audio sound systems. They sound a whole lot better. The Venue sound system is not that great. And that's where I feel the Sonet actually, the Kia Sonet, has a bit of an edge on the Venue. Even on the inside, I feel the Kia Sonet feels just that little bit more premium. We really did want to include the Kia Sonet in this test, but the car wasn't available, so we couldn't really include it. But the Kia Sonet does, yes, it does feel a little bit more premium. Now we are going over some bad patches, so that gives me time to tell you what the Venue's ride quality is like. And overall, it's fairly good. At low speeds and over slightly small imperfections, the Venue is pretty sorted. It keeps you really well comfortable. It's only when you go to really high speed bumps or really deep potholes that the thuds start to filter into the cabin, and that's where the Venue sort of does not feel as robust of an SUV as the Nexon does. And for that fact, even the Brezza has really good ride quality and really handles those rough patches really well. The Venue, it's fairly soft. Even the driving position is very car-like. So in that regard, the Venue doesn't feel as SUV or as robust in terms of its ride quality. But that said, it is dynamically very sorted. So it's balanced really well. When you chuck it into corners at speed, the Venue handles it really well. The high-speed stability as well is fairly good on the Venue. You can hold a really good 120 kmph cruise on the highway all day long without breaking a sweat. And the Venue will really be a great companion for the highway. Like I said, it's only those really big bad potholes that sort of show the Venue's soft roady nature a little bit. So now let's talk about the Venue's engine. Now this is the 1-litre turbo petrol engine. It makes 118 bhp and 173 Nm of torque, and it's actually a really nice peppy engine. So when you step on it, especially with this DCT, it really kicks down quickly and then picks up pace really well. So the Venue's engine is actually very nice. It's also fairly refined. When you do push it past around, I would say around 3000, 4000 RPM, it does start to get vocal, and that really rough 3-cylinder sound really filters into the cabin. But it's not too bad. It is definitely more refined than the Nexon, but nothing compared to the Brezza. The Brezza's engine is easily the most refined, but of course we'll talk about that when we hop into the Brezza. But here, the 7-speed DCT is also really nice. When you're in the city, it shifts up easily, shifts up really well, really quickly, does so intelligently to save fuel. And then when you really need to sort of get going, it also shifts down quickly and puts you in the power band. Then the Venue also has drive modes, so you can select between Eco, Normal and Sport. So these drive modes basically just dial up the throttle responses. I couldn't really even feel the steering weighing up too much in Sport. One thing I have noticed is that the gearbox, it downshifts really aggressively in Sport. So if you are driving spiritedly, or if you're driving on a hilly section of road where there's lots of corners and you need to constantly downshift, the Sport mode is actually really helpful in that. You can of course stick it into Eco and the gearbox sort of shifts up even more, as frequently as it can to save on fuel economy. And then of course Normal is for daily driving. So drive modes are a good addition to the Venue, but don't really think that this will change the driving experience too much. So now finally we are driving the all-new Maruti Suzuki Brezza. Now this is actually the biggest surprise for me. So the Brezza has a 1.5 litre petrol engine. It's naturally aspirated, unlike the two turbo petrols that we have with us in this test. It makes 102 bhp and 137 Nm. And if you see the numbers, it's actually significantly down on both power and torque compared to the other two. But it really doesn't feel that way from behind the steering wheel. Firstly, this engine is easily the most refined of the bunch. We did a couple of months ago, we did a test of the best petrol engines under rupees 20 lakh, and it was the 1.2 litre engine from Maruti that won in that test. And of course, while this is the 1.5 litre engine, what I'm trying to say is that Maruti makes really good engines. Now this petrol engine is silent at even at 2,500 RPM. The engine is super silent. It is butter smooth. You can barely even feel the vibration inside the cabin. It is really smooth. In terms of engineering, the Brezza feels easily the most well engineered of the lot, and that's not just down to the engine. So also the gearbox, this is the 5-speed manual. It is super slick to use. You can just use the clutch and it really does put a smile on my face, and you downshift rev match and you can just power through, and the Brezza is so much fun to drive. And I also really like the diesel in that Brezza, but of course the diesel is now gone. But even this petrol is a fantastic engine. When you take it beyond 3000 RPM, when you really do rev it out, the noise it makes is so enthusiastic. It encourages you to go ahead and rev it further and further, and then it picks up pace also really well. The Brezza is so much fun to drive that it sort of goes under the radar, because Maruti Suzuki might not be known for making the most enthusiast-friendly cars, but the Brezza is so much fun to drive. When it comes to fun to drive, actually, when it comes to giving that enthusiastic feeling behind the wheel, the Brezza is number one in this test. And that is also down to the steering. It feels really well connected, really well weighted. There's a lot of feedback as well. The steering is really nice. If you get the automatic variant, you also get paddle shifters in the back. But of course, this is the manual, and we're not really big fans of that new 6-speed automatic on the Brezza. It sort of bogs down the engine. And if you're looking for a petrol automatic, the Venue should probably be your choice. Even in terms of handling, we're getting into a corner now, and the Brezza, it handles really well. So the body roll is really well contained. It doesn't feel too soft. You can completely feel what the front end is doing, and it gives you a lot of confidence to actually push the Brezza hard. It's not sitting on really wide tires, and nor is the rubber very sporty. Of course, this is a mass market compact SUV at the end of the day, but when you do put it through some corners, it does put a smile on your face. Now let's talk about ride quality. Now the Brezza, it handles bumps and imperfections really well. I feel the Nexon has that little bit more robust feeling when you hit those really bad potholes at speed, but the Brezza is a very close second. The ride quality is fantastic. The platform underneath you, it feels really solid, really stable, and even the high-speed stability of the Brezza is fairly good. This does not feel light, it does not feel flighty. It feels well-weighted and stable at speed, which gives you confidence to hold really nice high average speeds on the highway, and it means that the Brezza is really great for long distances as well. Now that we know what the Brezza is like to drive, let's talk about this cabin. Now, Maruti Suzuki has really overhauled the cabin of the Brezza, so you get this really nice, big infotainment screen. It sits really high, so it's really nicely into your line of sight. You don't need to look down to use it. It's also very responsive to the touch. I feel the menu layout and stuff like that feels a little bit outdated. It doesn't feel very modern or colorful. But that said, it really does do a good job, and it has all the functions and all the features that you need from a modern infotainment system. So of course, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, all of that is there. It also has voice commands. You also get connected car tech. So the Brezza is really well kitted out now in the tech department, which it really wasn't in its previous avatar. There's also wireless charging here on the Brezza. You also get a USB port up front. There's also a Type-C port to connect your phone to at the back and charge your phone up at the back. There's also rear AC vents. And overall, even the quality of the cabin has been improved significantly over the outgoing Brezza. So it does feel fairly upmarket. In terms of outright quality and outright feeling of premiumness, it's not as good as the Venue and probably not as good as the Sonnet as well. Again, a special mention to the Sonnet. We would have really loved to have it here for this test, especially the diesel automatic Sonnet. That would be a great contender for this test, but sadly we couldn't get it. But the Sonnet is the most premium feeling in the segment. The Venue probably comes second, and the Brezza is third. So there are some scratchy plastics around, but overall the quality is really good. It feels really solid, robust. I also really like these AC controls. There's a nice toggle switch. So overall, the cabin has been really well executed on the Brezza. One thing I forgot to mention actually, and probably the biggest feature highlight of the Brezza, is the fact that it now finally gets a sunroof. This was the first Maruti Suzuki car to get a sunroof in India. Of course, the Grand Vitara has followed with a panoramic sunroof, but the Brezza does get a sunroof. It's something that buyers in this segment really like to have. So it's nice to see that the Brezza gets it. What the Brezza doesn't get is a fully digital instrument cluster, but honestly, I don't really miss it. I really like how these analog dials have been executed. The readouts are crisp, the numbers are written nice and clear. I also really like that feeling of an analog needle singing all the way to the red line. So, so I don't really miss the digital instrument cluster not being here. I actually really like this analog cluster. So now I'm just going to sit quiet and let you listen to the Brezza going through the motions for a bit so that you realize a little bit about what it does sound like. So. The Brezza, really, it's an underrated car when it comes to having fun behind the wheel. So, of these three compact SUVs, if I had to pick a winner today here in this test, it would be the Brezza. Now, the Brezza is easily the most refined of the lot. It's also very spacious. It's got all the right features, all the right equipment. And of course, there's the all-important Maruti Suzuki badge that the Brezza carries that brings with it reliability and a very expansive service network. But there is a downside to the Brezza, and that's the fact that firstly, there is no diesel engine option. So if you are looking for an efficient diesel, you'll have to probably look elsewhere. And while there is a petrol automatic, firstly, it is very pricey, 13.96 lakh for the top end petrol automatic. And then that automatic is also not the best unit in the world. It is very sluggish and it sort of bogs down that 1.5 litre engine. So if you are looking for a petrol automatic, you should probably look away from the Brezza. Next, let's talk about the Tata Nexon. Now, the Nexon easily feels the most dated here in this test. It's not got an update in quite a while. Yes, Tata has added some features like ventilated seats and given it some stuff on the inside, including an air purifier. But overall, the Nexon is in need of a substantial update. So on the inside, the cabin feels a little bit dated. Yes, the quality is fairly good, but it is a little bit dated. The instrument cluster feels really old. The infotainment screen is not great at all. So the Nexon, yes, it does have really robust ride quality and the diesel engine is really nice and strong, but unless you're looking for just safety from your car, you should probably not be considering the Nexon too much. Then we have the Hyundai Venue. Now the Venue is actually a very, very good package. It is comfortable, it looks really good. It's also got all the features that you would want. This 1 litre turbo petrol with the DCT is a fantastic engine gearbox combination. The DCT is very advanced, especially for this segment. So the Venue is a very, very good product overall. It also has the option of a diesel engine. Yes, you don't get a diesel automatic. For that, you'll have to probably look at the Kia Sonet, but the Venue is also a great product. So if you are looking for a compact SUV, if it's petrol manual that you need, we suggest the Vitara Brezza. If it's a petrol automatic or a diesel manual that you need, we suggest getting the Hyundai Venue. And if it's robust safety that you need, we suggest the Tata Nexon.